if you live in a horribly toxic environment and you do all the brain work you want to do, you can be doing the neurofeedbacks, the stellate ganglion blocks, the mental health drugs, the ketamines, the limbic somatic works. You can do all of that you want, and it may give you some relief. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but if you live in a house that has 10 times the amount of mold you're supposed to, the symptoms you're fighting are going to keep coming back because your body's unsafe. And if you remove the toxin that produced a fight or flight response in your body that made you feel unsafe, that made you distrust the living environment you're in, even when you remove it, for many people that I've worked with, they still don't feel safe. They're still in fight or flight, even though the toxin has been removed.
Welcome to the TBD Fit Podcast on Dr. Talks. I'm your host, Daniel Chille, and I will be guiding you through this wellness journey in terms of optimizing health and longevity, where we unpack the science, the do's, the don'ts, and everything in between. Come join us. Look forward to seeing you inside.
Today's guest is Dr. Jaban Moore, a functional medicine practitioner with a personal and professional journey rooted in uncovering the real cause of chronic health conditions. After struggling with chronic symptoms himself and watching his mom endure years of misdiagnosis and infective care, Dr. Moore has dedicated his career to helping others who feel unheard, dismissed, or caught in a cycle of symptom management. He takes a personalized approach, going beyond generic protocols to identify the root cause of chronic illness, including gut dysfunction, immune balance, Lyme, parasitic infections, environmental toxins, hormone disruptions, and certainly more that we'll dive in today with extensive advanced training that spans cellular health, functional blood chemistry, kinesiology, nutrition, metabolic health. He has supported thousands of individuals in reclaiming their health when conventional medicine and one-size-fits-all strategies failed. Today, we're going to be exploring insight into navigating complex chronic illness, the role of the gut microbiome, systemic health, functional strategies for immune support, and how we need to rethink healing. The title episode is Neurotoxic Loop: Why Your Brain Must Feel Safe Before Your Body Can Detox. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Nice little long intro I got there for you, but it's been a journey to get here. And the topic is one that I have really found to be a secret sauce when it comes to why people are staying unwell
So
in
I
today's
love
society.
opening every episode with allowing the guest to provide their origin story. Pain drives purpose, and we can hear within that intro. Certainly yours is no different. So how did you get to doing what you're doing today?
I grew up with a mother who loved me just like every other mother. And I watched, and it's hard to talk about sometimes because I just watched what happened to her health. And at 10 years old, she got in a car accident. She was told at the ER that she was diabetic. She didn't know it. She had been, for the last 3 years, searching for help as her body was shutting down, as she was being medicated. She was on 40 pills a day, medication pills a day at this point. And it was medical mismanagement. It was oops, I didn't see the diabetes. And you go back and you look at something that seems so simple to catch that doctors are trained on every single day. And you just realize that the system isn't perfect, and there's a lot of people that fall through the gaps. And I just watched for the next 20 years after that, until 30, they're still trying to fix the things that happened when I was 10. Right. So my mother's health journey opened my eyes to there's a better way. There's better care that can be given, not one pill to fix the last pill's side effects, that there's probably something behind all of this. And then when I got into school finally in my doctoral program and started getting closer to being able to get out and help people, I ended up with Lyme disease after living in a moldy basement in college because I didn't have a bunch of money. I was poor and I was staying in the cheapest place I could find. And like so many others, we just do what it takes to get where we need to go. And I got sick. And then I had to fight for my health when I was out there trying to fight to figure out how to help my mother. And when I finally got into practice and I got enough knowledge to be able to help myself, my mom had already had her stomach surgery, gastric bypass. She'd already had her thyroid removed, lymph nodes removed. She'd already been medicated for so long that her body was just in a terrible, terrible place. So yeah, my pain to purpose is just seeing what doctors that aren't looking for root causes, even if they haven't been trained, right? Like I don't blame the doctors, but I can just see what happens to the patient who just is going from doctor to doctor, getting passed from pill to pill to pill, hoping that, they'll find help. I've seen what that does to families, and I want to stop that from happening to other families.
It's a sad reality, but all too common, right? I share, and I heard you almost kind of getting emotional at the start there. Share a very similar sentiment within my mom as well. And it's not always for any fault of the physicians, right? It just, these are tools in our toolkits. And so some of us decided, well, we need to find better tools, right? We want to learn more. We want to continue more to help at a higher level. How do you then start with your patients? So similar with your mom as an example, or even in your story, right? To be able to overcome what you've had to go through. How do you start? Where do you start?
And, I'm going to answer this differently than I've ever answered before, I think. I start by educating the masses to the best of my ability. I start by having a newsletter and an Instagram and doing podcasts because in reality today, people, they don't come into my clinic hardly ever without knowing who I am anymore because I've on purpose made it a mission to educate. And when people come in, they have an idea of what I'm doing and why I'm doing it and how I think about it so that by the time they get to me, like actually getting to me, they've been given a plethora of information. And then I can get into the assessment, the new client questions, the almost, it sounds negative in connotation, but the interrogation of what has happened in their lives from birth all the way up to now. And so often people will have their paperwork filled out and then I go and read it back to them. And I've had someone complain that why did I spend time to read back the paperwork to them? And I was just like, because 99% of the time when I read back what you wrote, I get more info. So I've just learned over a decade and more than 10,000 clients that basic history of what happened. Were you sicker than other kids? Did you struggle with anything when you were growing up? Eczema, psoriasis? Do you have personality types such as a little bit of OCD or perfectionism? Are you dealing with anxiety? Like all of these things that seem normal in today's society help me to understand how you operate and help me to understand how I can phrase the conversation we're going to have, but also how I can tweak the nutrients that are going to go into your body and figure out what is more important for you to do. Also, our questionnaires are asking about, have you done radon testing in your house? Have you checked what's in your water? What are you breathing in the air? Is there mold there? What's the dental history of your life? Do you have implants in your body? So I'm going down this rabbit hole of everything that interacts into your world from a perspective of detail so that I'm not missing things. And here's the key, because a lot of people listen like, well, my doctor does a lot of that. What I've tried to do is create a system that doesn't let me miss things when I get really excited about something. So my note has a bunch of check boxes going down it that I have to follow that makes sure that I don't forget where I'm at in all my questions when we get on an exciting topic about your life, or when we go on a soapbox about whatever it is that's important to you. I mean, this week I was talking to a dad that was all about the ag bill that was going through and how the pesticides were in the lab testing that we saw. And by the time we got back to it, I'm like, I would have forgotten where I was, but I have the system that makes sure that I don't miss questions. So I don't get super excited. So yeah, the system that I've built makes sure that we don't miss things. And the biggest thing is the shiny object syndrome. I have so many friends that are in practice that it's the shiny object syndrome, right? Like it's gone from mercury to mold to parasites to EBU to peptides. And whatever this shiny object is becomes the passion because they're dove into it. And then that's what they use for the practice at the time. And my goal with my providers in my clinic and myself is to remember the roots and be able to bring us back to what is going to work best for the individual. So just that initial intake paperwork is, I think, a huge portion of it. And the process of building out your roadmap, your step-by-step process as we go through. And as we're doing this, by the way, I'm dragging in all the labs that you brought to me. I'm using all the labs that I've brought in. I'm making sure that we do all of that to build out a roadmap. And then I tell people all the time, I go, and that creates step one. And step one helps us to understand what we're going to do after this specific appointment. And then in between, we communicate with our clients day by day because they have unlimited chat access in the software we use. And it allows for us to make tweaks as we're going. And those tweaks become really important for us when we get to second appointments. And then We reevaluate everything. So I just feel like what we're doing, because of how my mom went through all of this and things were missed, my goal was to try and not miss things, not get stuck on the new thing. And I think that's what you're hearing just by the way that we operate is we want to make sure that we're a family with the clients we're working with.
Ultimately, above what I mean, all else there to me, it's listening. I think certainly asking the right questions. I think there are better questions than other questions, and I appreciate how thorough your approach is to make sure that no stone goes unturned. Similarly, we'll look at transgenerational impact as well, right? Parents' health, grandparents' health, what zip code they grew up in. You mentioned something as simple as radon, which is what I just had my parents test for in their home, which was elevated. So it's all these details. Curious before we kind of segue, you mentioned perfectionism, OCD. Let's say not some severe OCD, but in terms of being a perfectionist, where do you often find that correlates with? And out of curiosity in myself, but ultimately that's one I will hear as we're adding more staff and more practitioners, and that's a dual-edged razor, if you will, only because one, it allows for ambition and success, like for you're motivated to achieve. But on the other end is you're kind of stuck in the nuance. You're constantly analyzing, which further allows you to be more hyper targeted in treatment or care or achieving success. But where do you find that in terms of maybe like in terms of some sort of systems biology that is related to this specific trait?
I think you could take this a lot of ways, which is going to always be the answer in health, right? So it's that figuring out what might be triggering this. So, did you have a traumatic childhood where you felt out of control? So now you're trying to be in control. So, that's a potential possibility. Do you have a brain inflammatory response happening due to molecular mimicry or the immune system triggering inflammation in your brain? So, that's autoimmune encephalitis, which we do a lot of work with that category of people. So, they got, let's say, PANS-PANDAS for a kid. It's a pediatric neuroacute onset of this inflammation of the brain. And when that's happening, because inflammation's hitting different parts of your brain, you have different symptoms. Sometimes it's movements of the body, we call them tics. Sometimes it's anxiety because the brain feels unsafe. Maybe it's OCD is being triggered because of the portion of the brain that's being affected. So it could be the trauma, it could be the brain inflammation. It can also just be lifestyle choices, right? So if you're a person that has a lot of tasks all the time, you may have created a lifestyle where you are trying very hard to be in control because you run a business, you have multiple children, you have a lot of responsibilities. So for some reason, even if it's gut just dysbiosis, so bacteria of the digestive tract causing an issue, you're going to have this propensity toward that type of personality. And here's the thing that you said. Yes, these individuals may make great employees, great entrepreneurs, great, you name that thing. My team and I were like, okay, we need a person for a position in the office. And traits that we were looking for was to be very organized. So we're talking about that type of person now. And that's a really great skill for the job, but it takes energy. If you are constantly thinking about perfectionism and you're constantly needing to do things in a very specific way, it may make you really good at some tasks, but it costs. It costs energy. It costs effort from your body. And if you're healthy, maybe you can withstand that and you can build a great business. If you are unhealthy and you're dealing with mold that's generating inflammation in your brain, and that's why you have this, then it costs more and more energy. And I look at your energy bank account and I go, is this necessary? Is it necessary to have the expenditure of energy you're putting into that task there? And I'll give you an example of this. And I use it all the time. I've been having my family dinners for my family for like the last 13, 14 years at my house. That makes me, like 20 something. I started doing that as a guy, and my family's not small. It is about 45 to 60 people that show up. I didn't have a house that could handle this. So if you're listening right now and you're like, I do not want 45 to 60 people, this is going to make sense to you. I lived in, at the time, half of a duplex that was like 1,200 square foot. We fit everybody in that house. And I said, hey, anybody that wants to complain, it's at your house next year. No one's complained in 13 years. So it keeps being at my house. Maybe I should have made a different rule. But the thing is I don't care if my house is dusted perfectly. I don't want it dirty, but it doesn't have to be perfect. I don't care if there's a little bit of, mud drug in the winter and somebody gets it on my hardwood floor. I think it was, LVP or whatever. I was It was like a cheap half duplex at the time. But my aunts were done with that. They're just like, I get so wore out. It's not fun. I have to make my house perfect. I have to decorate. I have to plan all the food. So what did I do? I made it a potluck and I got my house clean enough and I just do it. And it's not stressful to me. So I'm not applying the energy that they were applying that made it a burden on their lives. And if you're creating this burden from everything you do, how are you not going to get sick?
Yeah, ultimately, it's a premise of framework too, I think. So going back to the whole notion of perfectionism or OCD, what I have found too, um, there's a connection with pregnenolone, and not to make this all about systems biology now, but how this is relevant to SIRS and your specialty and chronically ill patients, which is what we're seeing growing within our patient population as well, is a mold mycotoxic burden. There's chronic infections, there's gut permeability, there's some degree now of autoimmunity developing and certainly neuroinflammation. And now we have a glutamate imbalance and your high anxiety, high stress, serotonin imbalance, and low GABA. And now you're constantly either ruminating or striving for perfection. And it connects in terms of our microbiology because I look at my second child, who I share this story sometimes, where I didn't know what the terrible twos were until I met her. And yet the pregnancy was very difficult. There was a lot of stress. There was loss in the family. She wasn't eating right, sleeping right, moving right, talking right, pooping right. Baby was bathed in cortisol. If you look at our microbiome, when I did a stool test, it was deficient, and largely devoid of any sort of GABA producing microbes, Lactobacillus plantarum, Bifidobacterial long, and some others. And we now give the child some GABA and they're two different children. But ultimately, it's kind of this missing microbes. People often think of, we are these specific traits, but I find it's often enough. If you look under the hood, it's our microbes that are really dictating who we are at any given moment and kind of the anxiety that we uphold, or sometimes the release that we're able to unfold. And so ultimately I couldn't agree more with you in terms of trying to create an environment where it's a little bit more low stress, but then you have the ability to buffer against the reality of what's happening. So 45 people is no short, small feat. I know when we used to do Friendsgiving, it used to be closer to 85 people. And eventually we had to stop because it was just too much. We found a better sweet spot for us, closer to 45, which is a little bit more manageable. But at the end of the day, it's a question of what makes sense for you and looking at where are you starting from. So going full circle in terms of how ill the patient is, right? Their ability to detox, maybe segueing into there, at 45 people, even if it's okay. Like it doesn't have to be perfectly clean, right? You're able to enjoy it. It's sufficient for everyone. It's a potluck, less headache. But what about someone whose cup is kind of overflowing, right? So they're stuck in this fight or flight. I think the topic being about brain neuroinflammation. I understand when you said the context of helping people understand there is hope, trying to disseminate the research to where you're providing value for the patients ahead of time. Ultimately, where now do you start with someone you went through the intake, you've listened well enough, you've seen their whole story, transgenerational included. Are there specific places that you start with looking at nervous system, HRV, specific markers, detox, et cetera? Where do you typically go?
Oh, absolutely. We definitely like to run a good start point for labs. And I think that's different for a lot of doctors. It depends on, honestly, how much can you spend on labs? So where we begin is we'll get what I call it, just the standard functional medicine blood panel, the red and white blood cells, inflammation, thyroid, some inflammatory markers, your CMP, CBCs, which give us a lot of good information about where this person is on a physiologic state. And then I run an organic acid test and then a hair tissue mineral test. Those are some of our beginning points that allow us to get an idea physiologically where they are. Now, I've ran enough organic acid tests at this point that I feel like that test can give you a lot more than what most practitioners are pulling from it. So when we get into that test, it's 76 markers, and I'm trying to see if that test is telling me that mitochondria are suppressed. So we'll see Krebs cycle, we'll see beta oxidation, which is both mitochondrial energy production portions of the test. And if I see some sort of degradation to those areas, if we see the markers being high, I'm going to start thinking if it's one, okay, this is more microbial. Two, still probably more microbial. So let's go look at parasites, bacterial overgrowth. Let's look at Candida yeast. If I start seeing 3 plus, I start going, well, this might be mold toxicity or radioactive elements like we mentioned earlier, radon, but also uranium and radium that can be in the water supply. And I've done enough pattern checking within just my own testing of, okay, you come back as a positive in an HTMA, which is the hair tissue mineral test for uranium. And then I go look over at the organic acid test and I see the 3 markers. I'm like, okay, there it is. Or we run a urine mycotoxin test after I find the mitochondrial markers. And now we see mold. So I've gotten to the point now where I'm looking at mitochondrial markers and irritation in that area for what is the causation? Is it microbial? Is it toxic? Then I'm going from there and I'm looking at, do we have oxalates, which oftentimes can come from molds? They can come from food, but more often than not, when I see somebody with an elevated oxalate level, it ends up being mold as what allowed for that to be there and be worse. Same thing with B2 deficiencies. Mold is the number one thing I see there. If I see minerals low, so if I look at an organic acid test and it shows that mineral absorption is low, if I see amino acids being low, if I see sodium potassium on that HTMA being low, or I see albumin in a blood test over 4.6 or 7, I start looking at, well, what the heck is stressing this person? And mold is going to be a high likelihood that I'm looking for. So I'm going to go run that total toxin test next. So I'm using this beginning testing point to help me go find what those root causes are. And another standpoint that we've done is, and we experimented with this for a while, why don't just do the toxin test first? The problem was when I did the toxin test first, if it was negative, it had no information about the person without running the other stuff on what could potentially be wrong. So it was going back and forth on figuring out like, sure, we can run it all, or I got a start point for us, depending upon the patient, what they feel like they want to be doing. And that helped me to see that because the organic acid test also at the top of it for Great Plains Laboratory, a mosaic has 18 markers of bacterial overgrowth, mold colonizations, and candida yeast markers. And about half the time, I can figure out if you're in mold, if you're colonized by mold, if you've got GI bacteria or candida fungus, heavy metal toxicities out of those first testings. I don't even have to go to the next step. But the other half, then, yeah, we've got to go look further based off of the signs that we're seeing coming out of what, again, I call my physiology testing, which is the HTMA, the blood, and the oat.
I appreciate that. Organic acid test is quite a complex test. I used to run a lot more of that through Great Plains Lab, as you just mentioned. And then I've since flipped, interestingly, to start more with the toxin test, but that's actually only after we'll run the blood, we'll see what's going on there, standard panels, or our advanced longevity wellness panel with a plethora of more markers, far more in-depth analysis. I always say that the number one longevity test no one's running, and that's hyperbole, obviously you and I are, but is a microbiome test. So we understand now the interplay between our gut buddies and every biological system and every organ function in the body. But it's interesting because the oat test, to me, it's a very good snapshot into 4 very large buckets. One is going to be liver and detox. Second one is going to be mitochondrial function, as you already spoke about, and metabolism. Then there's going to be brain health, so neuroinflammation, which was kind of the topic of today's conversation, and then gut health, which you just alluded to, gut and fungal markers. So I think it provides a very, very good snapshot, which then warrants, I guess, further, let's call it investigation or sometimes a deeper dive. And interestingly, so what we historically used to run, I think that's one of the most comprehensive tests, certainly, which A, is often overlooked, or B, is just clinicians don't understand how to interpret it. I think it sounds like with so much breadth of testing that you have created this kind of mastery in terms of analysis. Because I had a patient literally come to my office the other day and she's like, Daniel, I have these functional medicine practitioners who run so many tests, but they understand less than I do. And so we were literally going over her oat test and I was like, okay, well, let me help explain this to you like probably no one else has. And so ultimately, you're right, there's tremendous value there. And then it sets the foundation in order to see, okay, what else maybe warrants further investigation. Do you see a chronic pattern happening here within this population? I understand who you see is biased naturally, but within the patient profile that you see, because toxins becoming more prevalent, people just getting more and more sick, obviously cancer on the rise, autoimmunity, same equally. What do you see are maybe common patterns that are at the root of this?
If I take a step back and I step away from being all the way down the rabbit hole of SIRS, mast cell, very complex situations, I randomly will get your person that comes in for optimization. They come in for longevity. They come in because they feel okay, but they want to feel better. It's the husband, the wife, somebody related to one of my clients that has built trust in our clinic, and I get to see them. And I look at their basic blood panel, looks pretty clean. I look at their organic acid test. Nothing's outside of what I consider the optimal ranges, which is on a mosaic test is kind of like your bar that's a little fatter. It's in yellow, orange, whatever color you want to call that. So for those individuals, I'm just like, we have to go down a totally different pathway, because these functional medicine markers, if you're using the standard ranges of medicine, you're going to fall within everything. So then I got to go, you got to narrow the vision, or you got to go to different, more specific testing. And the pattern that comes out for me is this: we live in a toxic world. Either you're doing something to remove the toxins, or you are accumulating the toxins. There is a subset of individuals that are HLA-DR, which is about 25% of the population. They don't detox well. There's MTHFR, which is 30 to 40% of the population. They also don't detox quite as well. And there's a number of other genetic pathways that you and I've talked about as we've gotten to know each other. And you could spend hours talking about the different potential pathways. But if you just look at the population and expect 40 to 50% are not going to detox well, then you're going to be accumulating toxins in at least half of our population, at the bare minimum, even of those who care about being well. So what I'm seeing is this: over a lifetime, the burdens grow in the toxic category, which then does what you were talking about earlier, throws off the microbiome. As the microbiome becomes off, you stop being able to process dopamine appropriately. We see dopamine rising because your microbiome is supposed to break it down and allow for enzymes to convert it to norepinephrine, epinephrine, and even break it down and get out of the body, are being damaged. And we accumulate that. That's why some people tend to start worrying more and more as they age. Their brains get more foggy as they age. Their energy, not because it's a natural degradation of the amount of energy you have, because hey, I'm turning 40 this year. When I go and work out with the 25-year-olds that I like to go work out at the gym next to, I feel like I'm doing okay. I'm not saying I'm on their page completely, but I'm doing okay. So when I look at my mitochondria, they're saying, hey, we're here, we're working, we're healthy. So what I'm getting at is, it's a toxic accumulation that is happening in our populations, which hit the gut. When the gut starts going down, it hits the mitochondria. We start seeing the Krebs cycle go off. And then the more markers that are off in the Krebs cycle, to me, is the more the toxic burden is happening. The polarity, the electron transport chain of the mitochondria, is being affected by all of these differently charged particles that get in our bodies. And I'm just seeing the damage being done. And that's where I go back to this organic acid test. I like to go back and look at this organic acid test. The more markers in your mitochondria that are off, the more damaged you are, the longer it's going to take you to heal, the more depleted nutrients you probably have, which I can go prove on other testing, the more inflammatory markers you're going to have, the more toxins you're going to accumulate. So I bring it back to the organic acid test because I've really learned to enjoy that. It's become a favorite test. It's an easily reran one. It's easily reproducible. I do see it progress when I see symptoms progress, which is why I've loved it. Sometimes, if I want to stick a little poker at some of the other tests, it's like toxin tests. Sometimes they look perfect the first time because your body isn't detoxing. Your body's stuck. It's in fight or flight, which I can prove out because there's no creatine in your organic acid test hardly. It's below 100. Your mineral tests on sodium, potassium in your hair are depleted. Your ALT, AST in your liver is actually more on the low end. Your alkaline phosphatase on the low end. So when I see all these markers, I'm like, you're not detoxing. Why would I run a tox test on you when I know you're not pushing the toxins out? They're all still in, all the toxins are still sequestered in your cells. So a lot of the tests, or for instance, I had people came to me from Mayo. Their immunoglobulins were below range. Well, why am I going to go run all my immune testing on immunoglobulins when you're not producing them? So I continue to go back to minerals and mitochondria to make sure that your body's operating well enough to be able to then go get further information and have any success at all being able to work with you.
My mentor said that a decade ago. Said Daniel, it's everything takes a hit at the mitochondria. And I don't know if you run the me screen with Hemal Patel, but looking at the health of the mitochondria is critical to assess the health of the individual. And so, to me, that connection between our microbiome and mitochondria are critical. And if you can restore that function, you're going to have someone age very, very healthfully, very gracefully. And then you can do some fun stuff when someone just wants to practice longevity, quote unquote, medicine. But I actually want to echo your sentiment because I agree with you. Because I, at one case in point, I had a older lady who came to me. We did a toxin test. And again, that wasn't upon inception. That was after a few months working together. And we kind of, I always see where someone's at, like they're redlining, right? They're yellow light, green light, and then we get to superhuman. But ultimately, she was very, very unwell, couldn't even function when she walked into my office. She was like a walking zombie. Had asked me to turn off the lights and to kill the music. So certainly redlining. Later on, we ran it. And after this, we did several rounds of gut cleanup, fibromyalgia. She was super, super ill, but found some very, very high levels of specific microbes, clean that out. And she was two different people. I mean, she was 75% better within, I don't know, 6 weeks. And she was struggling for 6 years minimum, like couldn't even get out of bed. But ultimately, so then we ran a toxin test after that because there's probably more at play here. And certainly that was accurate, but it wasn't to the level that I had thought it would be. And sure enough, I had assumed exactly what you had said, is that detox pathway still needed support. It was still sequestered in our adipose, which were higher at the time. And so we did some more rounds of cleanup and then repeated. And certainly enough, you'll see more kind of spilling over and then reflective of kind of the true loads. You're actually very, very spot on in terms of why would you do that first if it's not going to even demonstrate in terms of where someone's true load is, because it's kind of sequestered into the adipose. Say you're cleaning someone out, you're getting someone a little bit better. What are the next steps then in terms of that patient journey? How else are you supporting them? What else are you looking at? Their labs are looking better, but they're still not feeling great ultimately. They're feeling better, but let's say they haven't gone over the hump. I understand everything's contextual, but what else are you thinking about or looking for?
I mean, this is bringing us in right now to the conversation of the title, neurotoxic loop. So at this point, we've got the data. We've put together information. I've looked at all these labs. I've done the history, and I'm going, okay, where do we actually begin care with this person? Because it seems like there's two categories of individuals out there. And there's the category of, I'm going to do my breath work, my yoga. I'm going to do my nervous system work. I'm going to will myself and manifest myself to be well. There's that category of people. And I'm not saying that isn't effective, but then there's also the side of over here where it's the reason why I'm unwell, the reason why I'm anxious, the reason why I have even mental health struggles, aside of the pain and the fatigue and the brain fog, is because I'm in mold. I have a parasite, I have Lyme disease, and I need you to do something that's going to remove those from my body. And that's what I want to do. But a lot of times these two types of personalities don't cross. So they don't want to do both, or they're at least not trained to do both. So that's where the neurotoxic loop was the aha moment that I wanted to get out and talk about. And it's if you live in a horribly toxic environment and you do all the brain work you want to do, you can be doing the neurofeedbacks, the stellate ganglion blocks, the mental health drugs, the ketamines, the limbic somatic works. You can do all of that you want, and it may give you some relief. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but if you live in a house that has 10 times the amount of mold you're supposed to, the symptoms you're fighting are going to keep coming back because your body's unsafe. Not saying you shouldn't be doing those things, but you should also make sure you go get rid of the toxin. And if you remove the toxin that produced a fight or flight response in your body that made you feel unsafe, that made you distrust the living environment you're in, even when you remove it, for many people that I've worked with, they still don't feel safe. They're still in fight or flight, even though the toxin has been removed. If you can even get it removed, that is, while you're going through that. With some people, you can't even get it removed because their body won't let you. And I'm going to connect the dots on this. So what I figured out is it's the toxic loop, right? Like you have a toxin that creates a lack of safety, that creates anxiety, that creates a fight or flight state, that puts your body out of the rest, digest, and detox state. And I add that last one because that's not usually what people say about parasympathetic, but it's what it really is. It's rest, digest, and detox. You detox your brain. Your glymph drains when you're sleeping. You detox your body when you're sleeping. This is why a lot of us pee and poo in the morning as a part of what we're doing. And if you're not allowed to get there because your body is stuck in a state where it is running from a bear, when you're running from a bear, do you stop and think about what's for dinner or how you're going to rest or what you're doing tomorrow? No, you're running from a bear. You're worried about where your foot is going to step next, each and every step. And what I have found is we have to do both at the same time. And I almost implement this for everybody. There is an exception to the rule that comes in and they have no irritability, dysautonomia, anxiety, depression, brain fog. And I'm like, well, you're unique. You could still do this, but it's optional. But for everybody else that has none of those symptoms, if you're not that person that has none of them, then we got to talk about doing both. And that's where the piece comes in because yes, toxins create mental health symptoms and mental health symptoms can generate inflammatory responses within the body that drives interleukins up that cause pain and inflammation and immune system dysregulation that leads to autoimmune disease that then leads to an immune system that doesn't protect you properly from bugs. I call them bugs because it's the Lyme disease, the Borrelias, the Bedorfias, the Epstein-Barrs, the COVIDs. So now you're weak and you're not protecting yourself and defending yourself. So then you get sicker. So if you're not doing both of these together, there's this huge portion of the people that I work with that are not going to see results. And I've seen it over and over again. I've seen people come in that have done all of the antibiotics, ivermectins and parasite protocols, the fluconazoles, all the natural versions, the homeopathic versions, but no one ever said, well, what's your mindset like? Are you ruminating about this problem? Are you dealing with the fact that your body is almost in like a PTSD immune state? And I've had so many people come in that are like, I did this, I've done therapy for 20 years and I did all the breath work and I don't even want to hear about that right now because I did it all. And no one asked them, what the air was like in their house or no one ran the proper immune panels on them. And by the way, if you've done one side of this coin and you didn't do the other side, that doesn't mean you have to give up on the one you're doing. Because if you're still living in mold, yeah, I got to detox it. We still got to get your mindset and your nervous system trained to feel safe afterward. So that's the loop that so many docs miss that I have found is a huge reason why sometimes I can give you the exact same protocol that the prior provider gave you, but fill the gaps.
It's interesting because trauma doesn't just stay psychological. It rewires your biology in the same pathway that toxins and infection do. So you mentioned, the immune cells of the brain there's microglia activation. And so you have this neuroinflammatory signaling. Toxins like mold, especially heavy metals, will be implicated here tremendously. And then you have this upregulation of some of those interleukins, IL-1 beta, IL 10, TNF alpha, which feed into these brain circuits that affect the areas of the brain like the hypothalamus, the amygdala, certainly mood signaling pathways. So it alters mood and cognition, and then your ability to buffer against stress. And so trauma, when you mentioned kind of this PTSD presentation, trauma resets the threshold for threat in the stress response, which elevates cortisol and then influences our immune system and metabolic functions downstream. So you're stuck in this fight or flight, stressed out state. And yet too often certain details, like you said, the quality of your air, which the EPA, I think, just came out with, is 2 to 5 times more toxic than outdoor air quality. And so ultimately there is so much that's often overlooked, which I agree assuming someone has done the breath work, how else are you suggesting like a DNRS or some sort of primal program where there's limbic retraining or something to help shift that state? Only because yes, toxins are keeping you stuck, so too is trauma, but when the threat is removed, assuming like they did, the mold cleanup and everything like that, how do you get someone to shift into that parasympathetic so they are detoxifying, so they are they're emptying out their toxic cup?
Yeah. So a program I recommend all the time is Primal Trust, which is somatic, limbic, vagal nerve, has some parts therapy put in there. It's an online program that I have fallen in love with for the clients that I work with because so many have come back to me and just been like, Doc, thank you for putting me in that, which tells me that they liked it and they feel that it's effective. And I've heard it over and over and over again. And that's a piece of the puzzle. So that is probably my beginning point because I need you to do something that is basically what I call physical therapy for the brain. There are yes, breathwork parts of that. There are eye movement parts of that would help with rewiring. There are body movement pieces to help release some of the triggering and emotional pieces. the mindset part. Honestly, the fact that there's a community there that can help you to see that you're not alone is another valuable piece of primal trust. And as primal trust can be very effective, it's not everything to everyone. So there are some people that need more. And EMDR is another good therapy that can be helpful, which is rapid eye movement therapy. Stellate ganglion blocks, which is a injection of an anesthesia, which the one I'd prefer people end up with is procaine, but lidocaine is also used. It numbs over top of basically the vagal nerve. It's an injection in the neck. Be a little scary for some people. I've done it 4 times now because I wanted to make sure if I'm telling you to do something, I've done it. And that injection will numb. And what it's doing, because I've gotten into the weeds of this a little bit, is it's basically giving the nerve where the anesthesia hits a time off, like a timeout, like just a break. So it's constantly just firing because of this trauma history you had, which can wear down on the nervous system. And it's allowing for it to rest for 20, 30 minutes. You'll feel a little numb for 20, 30 minutes. And that rest allows for that to reset. And for people that have gotten out of the trauma space, remember, like he said, you've gotten out of the moldy house, you've removed the triggers, then it actually can reset and then start to stick. And it's allowing for your body just to go into a reset. So that's another tool. I've seen neurofeedback be effective. I did this in my clinic for a long period of time where we did even a lesser than what's considered to be neurofeedback. We got into just alpha theta, just allowing for your body to go in that rest state, that repair state. It's kind of like being asleep, but awake. And I've had people experience some really interesting things, from just feeling good to remembering memories that they hadn't had that were part of their trauma history, to crying profusely because they're just letting out the buried emotions, to, I mean, one woman walked out and she's just like, has the sky always been that blue? And I was just like, yes, you've been in fight or flight for so long. You don't even remember colors to the vibrance that they can be. And then we went into peptides and we went into medications, which are not directly nervous system relief, but say a low dose naltrexone can be immune modulating. Bromelain for those who have histamine issues that are a part of this. You can get into cromolyn and ketotifen as medication. And I've always am going to use natural things first, which is going to be more of your natural herbals, which is going to be bromelain, stinging nettle, quercetin, rosemary. EAO is an enzyme that can help break down histamines, histamine diets. But we do all of those things to help kind of calm the system, calm the storm that your body's going through. We'll bring peptides in like BPC 157 with TB 500, KVP or KPV. All of those are peptides there, those letterings that can help to bring things down. Thymosin alpha is another really good one. And what I'm trying to do is figure out how to modulate the immune system, calm histamine responses, and allow the body to, again, feel safe, both from a conscious physical therapy, active way, and a passive medication, peptide, neurofeedback, stellate ganglion type way. Because for some people, they're just so revved up, they need more help than
In terms of the
breathing.
neurofeedback, any tools, brands, gadgets that you have found to move the needle?
The brand I was using, unfortunately, went with COVID, which was ClearMind. So I haven't really fell in love with one since, because my clinic became a lot more virtual and I've just referred to other clinics at this point. But I've been using Apollo Neuro as a gentle light thing on my ankle. And I've given that to several clients as a vibrational tool that helps to calm down. That's not neurofeedback. It's not a replacement for neurofeedback. Mind Lift has been used by some of the practitioners. That's been some effective. And that's been a tool that helps to monitor brain wave activity and give certain feedbacks. But the one that I was doing was, and I usually just ask the practitioner that someone finds in their local area because we're working nationwide. And I usually ask, like, what are you doing? What type of neurofeedback is it that you're providing? Is it the screens flashing? Is it lights on glasses? Is it sound appropriate? So there's a number of different types of technology, and I'm looking for usually sound, light, and color. So flashing of screen, different colors with like a binaural beats in the ears, because that's what I was using, and that's what I found to be very effective, which is more than what you usually send
Yeah,
home
sounds
with.
similar to the brain tap at that point. But um, go ahead.
It's similar. The brain tap, what it doesn't do is it's not reading you. So you don't have an EEG of the brain. And so it's not in real time able to respond to you. The devices the device that I used, the ClearMind, that's no longer around, but there's other devices like New Mind was a device that was similar. They've got a couple leads on your brain that's reading the electrical conductivity. and it will go up or down the conductivity of those areas, which will allow for the machine itself to change the pattern of the lights. So if you're doing true neurofeedback, it's interactive brain to response device. And this device would start to blur out the screen, turn off the sound when your brain would be too high or too low of energy. So it's trying to bring you back to the pattern that it was looking for.
It's interesting how tech has evolved so dramatically to be able to make that shift and to tune into what you need in real time. And I'm excited where things are going to continue to go. I recently adopted, I believe it's called IASIS, where attaching again electrodes to the brain and then it searches for the least interrupt or block pathway and aims to kind of also open up these any sort of blocked neural networks in the brain to enhance again this neuroinflammatory cascade that helps with our SIRS or kind of mold toxic, mycotoxic, Lyme patients, et cetera. And certainly heavy metals as well, which play into that, which obviously drives a lot of this neuroinflammation. But ultimately is I think it's a very, very overlooked component in terms of the healing because we can only heal at the speed of our nervous system. And if that's hijacked, obviously in the neural conductivity of the brain, well, it's difficult to get fully better. So I appreciate obviously the suggestions that you have provided. Any other wearables or tech that you have found to be beneficial?
That's the kind of the bulk of what we're doing. I've definitely played with a lot of toys. I got a pulsetto here in the house that I'm testing. I've sat on a Neuronovo chair, which is what they call a dopamine chair. It sends vibrations to help trigger dopamine. But I think the ones that I've mentioned are some of my favorites. I've done a Procaine IV post stellate ganglion block. And I mean, I've done the Procaine IV also not after stellate ganglion block. And that is the claim was it is enough to calm the nervous system similar to that of a ketamine without the potential side effects of ketamine, which I find ketamine to also be a useful tool. But if I can do it in a calming way that's not as stressful on the body, I want to do that because, again, respect to the nervous system. Let's do the least possible things that creates the most possible outcome so that the body heals and actually doesn't get overburdened with too many healing
No, I
devices or
agree with you.
modalities.
Interestingly, when I had my first done, I didn't derive really any benefit. I was quite surprised. So, not to say it doesn't work. I know ketamine also has its utility, but whenever it was both with the Procaine, as you had mentioned, I didn't find much utility. Not to undermine the possibility. Certainly, it can be tremendously impactful. I've heard others in their journey that it's tremendously helped. Others that I have suggested too any sort of acoustic or vibrational therapy. So some of these beds that you can lay on that vibrate, I had such a profound release in one circumstance. I remember, I mean, my HRV went through the roof and my deep sleep that night, I mean, nearly tripled. I mean, it was absolutely remarkable. Something as simple as just listening to music on your own, enjoyable music. We've gone so consumed in terms of what's the latest and greatest and we're no longer like walking through the park and listening to the melody of the birds chirp, right? Or walking grounded under the natural light of the sun. So um, there is stuff to be said about the impact of nature and its unrefined capacity and beauty to heal. But ultimately, there is a lot of power to the breath work and the DNRS and the primal trust, which we refer our patients to as well, that can be very therapeutic. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the question is, where is the bottleneck? And I think that's what you have demonstrated so beautifully in today's conversation and trying to figure out where there are blocks in terms of your capacity to heal naturally. And especially when we're talking about the brain and kind of these exposures, we just have to be cognizant of the damage that's being done because the blood-brain barrier is so thin, much like the epithelial barrier at the gut lining. So when you said one of the interleukins like IL-6, which crosses the blood-brain barrier, and then you have severe inflammation in the brain and LPS, lipopolysaccharides, which easily cross the blood-brain barrier, when you have some of these gram-negative bacteria that lice from the gut that travel up north, these resident immune cells of the brain, they become activated in response. They create this huge crosstalk of neuroinflammation and transforms these toxic exposures into now neurological symptoms, which unfortunately is when people raise their hand like, oh, I have brain fog or lack of mental acuity, their sharpness or memory recall is compromised. But the breakdown of this blood-brain barrier is seen much earlier. And then we can, and largely test that when you're doing, some of these immune testings that you were referencing earlier on, but looking at kind of where that breakdown does occur. And sometimes stress and trauma, it's part of my unlucky seven, I think, what you spoke about briefly. So my unlucky seven, bacterial, fungal, parasite, viral. And then you have now more ubiquity with heavy metals, environmental toxins, and stress and trauma, which to me just really paralyzes the entire system. And so going completely full circle, part of your intake is literally just listening more, right? I think it's like, what is the adage where a good practitioner gives you the plan, a better practitioner listens to then give you the plan. And then the best practitioner longs enough to tell you where you just already told you where the problem was. You've already identified it. You're often enough. We are the problem. We get in the way of our own solutions, right? We self-sabotage within our own habits. And sadly, that's our modern environment, right? We're constantly fed into this social media network, which nothing against anyone who's doing social media high level, which you are so brilliantly, which we admire your work to try to put out very valuable information at absolutely no cost to genuinely try to help people to take ownership of their own health. But obviously then the powering and interpretation of the testing to provide that roadmap, I think is also crucial. I know we're approaching time here. Any last takeaways or anything that you want to impart in our audience to kind of tie everything together?
I usually like to just talk about the neurotoxic loop and make sure people understand that the goal of just discussing how these intertwine is to also tell you the body is extremely adaptable and that no one singular way is going to work for everyone. And the beauty of all of this is as you start figuring out what's going on, you start chipping away at it. Something as simple as breath work or eye movements alongside of reducing burden in your life can start making real change. Like it can start making really incredible changes. I've had people that have been stuck for 20 years, been to all the gurus, spent all the money, and it was as simple as just figuring out a missing link. So just don't give up hope. Don't give up on yourself. Drove, literally, it sounds like a movie, through a blizzard from Kansas City to Eau Claire, Wisconsin to see Alan Lindsley when I was dealing with Lyme to try and get help because I couldn't find anybody locally. So it's like, whatever. I know what some of these people have been through. I know how hard it is to find a practitioner that not only will listen, but can execute. So just to kind of close it out, it's like, there is a way. There's always a way. You just got to find that one.
That is our certainly unrelenting mission. I think both you and I is to definitely instill hope and never give up hope, right? The body has a beautiful innate design. It was designed to heal. There's no exogenous molecule that you can take that does better than your body will. Sometimes you need that gentle push though, and we need to strip the bottleneck. So I definitely encourage people to check out your work. Where can they reach out, tune in, follow you?
Just look me up on any of the social platforms, my website. We're putting stuff out all the time. It's Dr. Jaban, spelled J-A-B as in boy, A-N, Dr. Jaban Moore.com or on any of the socials.
Last question I love ending every episode with is, if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Man, like I go back to childhood and I wanted to be like Superman. I wanted to fly around. But at this point, a superpower would just be with the job I have and a family and my son. And it would just, I don't know, intelligence seems pretty nice. So I can help a lot more people. I can solve some of the big problems out there. So maybe be super smart and be able to give that information out. Because I feel with that intelligence, I mean, I'd be able to crack the code of social media and just make good information go viral. That would be kind of fun. And that way it's in front of everyone.
I love your altruistic nature in regarding serving, your willingness to help, to obviously push out very valuable information to help people heal. This has been a breath of fresh air in many respects. I genuinely appreciate your time, the conversation today. Thank you so much. And in terms of everyone listening, please like, review, subscribe, share this with someone who needs to hear this message. And ultimately, until next time, stay healthy, stay wealthy, my friends. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the TBD Fit Podcast on Dr. Talks, where we unpack all things health and longevity. If you enjoy the show, like, review, and subscribe. This allows us to have a greater reach and help others on their health and wellness journey.